right, welcome back everyone to Sharing the Brain. This is episode 5. I am Steve Magadance, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Stu Guthrie, who will introduce our guest this week. Stu, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Yes, we're very excited to have a guest on today on our 5th episode. Our guest is Lisa Noll. Lisa was one of the first ones to reach out to us on Twitter and said, sure, I'll share the brain. So we respect that. One of the first things Lisa said to us was, well, I'm at elementary, which we said, fantastic. I'm at middle school, and Steve, you're at high school. So Lisa, say hello and tell us a little bit about your elementary experience as an administrator.
All right, good morning, everyone, and glad you were able to join us. I am Lisa Noll, and I am the assistant principal at Clear Spring Elementary. This is my 10th year starting my 10th year as an administrator in Northeast. I have been at Cerna Elementary, at Hardy Oak Elementary, Regency Place Elementary, and Clear Spring. So I have a pretty wide variety of experience, dual language, Title I, not Title I. So that's what I bring to the table.
Well, excellent. And I think when we had our little 30-second preview warm-up, I guess, for this episode, we had talked about the different roles that you have to play. And at elementary, typically you are, well, not typically, almost always, you are the assistant principal. Currently at my school, we have 2 assistant principals, and at the big high schools, there's sometimes 6 or 7. Mm-hmm. So talk to us really quick about how many roles you do and how that impacts what our main role is, which is to be an instructional leader.
Right. Well, I think my role at an elementary campus is a little bit different, especially at a Title I campus. Being the only assistant principal, I kind of represent the dad of the school because I'm kind of the chief finger shaker. I'm the keep everybody in line and the safety person, and sometimes always that means supporting my principal so that they, whoever they are able to be the instructional leader for the campus. But that does make it difficult when you're the only one to learn the ropes of that instructional leadership. You just kind of have to get it through osmosis, through passing sometimes, just because it's a busy time being an assistant principal. And it's busy across all levels, I'm sure, and in all schools, different demographics for sure. And I can speak to this week is, Labor Day week, and anytime there is a 4-day week, we do 5 or 6 days worth of work in 4 days for sure. And that's everywhere. That's every school, because there's so much to do, and kids are kind of weird because their schedule is off, and teachers are kind of weird because their schedule is off. And I think that, just that, like, if you cut it down to the very basics of the differences in the role, like as, assistant principal and principal on an elementary campus, it's very management oriented, which you have to really carve out time and build a relationship with your principal so that you can get that instructional leadership piece in there so that you can grow in that area.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really huge there, Lisa, this idea of the managerial role. I mean, we think about like schools as having a philosophical piece and the instructional underpinning, and then you have this day-to-day operations. And I think that's something Stu and I talked a lot about when we were together as assistant principals. That is probably the key difference between an elementary and a high school, is that there's sometimes, or usually always, someone to talk to about some of the managerial pieces of the day-to-day operations. Whereas if you're a solo assistant principal, you're solo, you're kind of alone, and it can be a lonely place to be if you're trying to handle the majority of some of the managerial components. I think that's a huge thing to understand for aspiring administrators too, right? There's still this day-to-day operation we have to manage along with the philosophical underpinnings.
Sure. I think, Steve and I have been assistant principals for more years than we've been a principal, especially for me. I still haven't done a full complete year in a public school, at least as a principal. Mm-hmm. And I do remember, it's interesting that in the big setting, where we had 6 assistant principals, there's a little bit of a loneliness there too. I mean, yeah, you had somebody next door for sure, but they were doing something. And
Right.
usually you may have just one task at hand, but you're doing it for 3,000 plus kids.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big challenge. Steve, I know your school specifically is also on a big high school. It's kind of a hybrid situation.
Yeah, that is a bit of a unique situation for the school where I am privileged to serve. I work with one assistant principal also, despite it being a high school setting. So, the assistant principal I get to work with is also aware of many hats, right? Testing coordination, inventory control, attendance, discipline, all the things that come with that managerial day-to-day thing tend to fall in their sphere of influence. And so we're both in some ways very lonely. So we find ourselves talking a lot. And I think another thing I would throw, you mentioned, Stu, like feeling lonely, even at a comprehensive high school. It's super, super important to figure out, who your people are, who you can keep company with. I think that was one of the things that you and I struck on early in our relationship, and kind of the idea for this podcast is that we shared a lot of common ideas about how to approach things. And I mean, that would be a place I would even encourage. I mean, even at a place where there are several, magnet school scenarios, right, where it could be really easy to play in your own sandbox. I mean, looking for ways to reach out across communities, have conversations with people who might be having a similar or maybe even a totally different experience, to try and create some, common understanding, common vocabulary, even to have someone to bounce ideas off of.
Sure.
I mean, all 3 of us are at different settings, elementary, middle, and high, and here we are having a conversation about some of the places where things might be a little bit different. Things might be very much the same. What we said at the beginning in our warm-up was, kids are still kids, and families are still families, albeit, maybe a difference in age between, 5 and 10 years potentially. There are still very similar conversations that we might be having at our levels.
Yeah. Lisa, talk about that, because I'd like to know, I've never worked at elementary, but your approach with students, they come in half as big as their backpacks probably, and all sorts of things they come with. So talk about that for a second, your approach to dealing with those little ones.
Well, I think this is a real good time to give a shout out to elementary school counselors, because I'm not a counselor. That is not it's not my credential area. I'm not certified in that area, but there's a lot of that goes on because we have to work in tandem for sure. And my approach is I strongly believe that we are in the business of people training before the education even starts, because we get little kindergartners that are, I've had kindergartners that you could put in their backpack. They're so teeny tiny little ones, and they've been on the planet less than 1,500 days or something. That's, if you put it down like that, that's not very much time to learn how to play school. And I don't mean play school in a negative way, but we're playing school. That's what we're doing and learning how. So my approach is always, I'm a firm believer in strong relationships with kiddos and their families. And when I talk to kiddos, it's always been easier for me to keep the same rules and expectations for kids that I have of my own in my own home, and the ones that I serve at school. And I do believe that I serve children. It's not, I don't work here and do this job. It's not my job. I am called to serve children.
Oh yeah, I think
who I am.
No, I think that's well said. I think we all feel that same way. And you can't be in a school with all these kids for all this time and feel like you just have a job. I mean, there's just something about, and for example, a kid came up to me yesterday and he was probably half as tall. I do feel tall. I will say this, working in middle school. When I left high school, I had to stand up straight every single day in the hallway because there's some big kids in high school. I kind of want to talk about that with Steve in a second, but a young man came up to me, and I talked to him several times this school year, and I had to bend down. It was in the hallway. I couldn't hear him that well. And it kind of made a point to me that I'm bending down to hear what this young man says. And he was a 6th grader, so he was just fresh out of elementary school. But, his concern was very real, and I wanted to, be there and support the young man, because just like the first graders going into elementary, sixth graders at middle school, they're given a lot of freedom for the first time. They have to find their way. And the eighth grade boys do look, pretty tall compared to them.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so Steve, take it from the high school perspective, because you do look, and you're tall yourself, but you do look some of those kids right in the eye, I'm sure.
Sure, I do. And I find myself both standing on tiptoes and sometimes bending over. That is partially because I think my hearing is going.
Yes.
What do they say about getting older? This hearing's the second thing to go, and you can't remember what the first thing was. Hey, Lolly, how you doing? She made her appearance. The streak is
All right.
alive.
Lolly, you want to say something, or you just want to just kind of...
I think what Lisa's saying is like again, that personalized kind of approach. And I think that's one of the similarities I think that exists. And so you mentioned talking to a sixth grade student. We both have, like, I think, beginnings and and culminations of the experiences at each of our places, right? So in a very real sense, we're all in the role of like helping students transition to a new place, right? Like a new kindergarten or pre-K if your school has a pre-K program, or sixth grade. And at the same time, we're also helping students transition to what's next, right? Whether it be the fifth grader going to sixth grade, or the eighth grader going to high school as a ninth grader, or a senior who's about to graduate, right? The topics of the conversation might be a little bit different, but we play very similar roles in helping students transition and become humans, right? And learn how to not necessarily play the game of school in like the negative sense that Lisa was insinuating, right? Like when she talked about it, but also the learning how to navigate systems. We may not use those phrases, or we may not say we're on-ramping a student, or we're helping students navigate systems, but that's what we're doing, right? We're
Sure.
helping students and humans try to understand how to be, or how to cultivate their inquiry and be curious, and to continue to leverage some of the skills and strengths they have as human beings, so that they can be successful wherever they may be headed next. And so I don't think that, while the topics are different and maybe the language that we use to interact with students is different, I think that the intent and the mission of it is still very much the same in schools.
Yeah. I wonder what, there's obviously tons of similarities. I wonder where our differences lie. Where do we find we can talk about the physical height of the kids as being a different thing, but are there any differences? I mean, yeah, they grow up, they get taller, they, do all that, but where are the differences in our three levels, do y'all think?
Well, I can say, okay, so before I became an administrator, my last teaching position for 6 years was fifth grade. Pardon me. And I think that they're one of the main differences. Okay, so I'm 5'4", so I deal with little tiny ones, but I also can feel very short, because there's some tall kids, and usually it's the girls that are tall. My experience, and I have a couple at my school now that are, probably 5'8", 5'9", young women, and so I find myself looking up a lot. Now I do a lot more kneeling down, but I think one of the biggest differences that we deal with is in elementary. There is so much structure. Walk on this tile, walk this way, don't talk here. And I think that the main reason for that is just the safety of everyone, because they have to listen in a controlled environment, my opinion, because, and what I tell kids all the time, if you're not behaving the simple, please come to the carpet and sit down, what happens when there's a fire and we have to get out and we say, please line up, let's go, and you choose not to do that? Then we're all in danger. So I kind of tie it back to that safety thing. But there's so much structure. And I remember one of the things I would do with my fifth graders is about spring break, I would start telling them, because they kind of get a little wonky. They're like sixth graders, fifth and sixth graders, so very similar. But I would say, if you can show me that you know how to do this, the last couple of weeks of school, you can walk in the hall like you're at the mall, as long as you're not disturbing what's going on around you. We won't walk in a line. We'll, do our thing, and then you can have free seating in the cafeteria at our table, and those kinds of things to kind of transition, excuse me, to the secondary level. And I think a piece of that is code switching. um, because we teach kids code switching. Like I would imagine at the middle school and high school level, you have a lot of conversations about language that you can use in certain places, not in school, not in front of your parents, but it's normal to try out, bad words or whatever. It's code switching. We're learning where to behave the right way. And so I think that, back to what you're asking, what the differences are, I think in elementary, we're teaching just a lot of very structured, transition-y, follow direction kind of thing. So then we can move on to, you earn freedoms the older you get and the better behaved you are.
Sure. I think picking it up from a middle school perspective, the one thing that we see is they start to get away from, maybe the things that they've been told to do. And I don't mean that like in a behavioral sense, but the way to think almost. They're starting to think on their own, and they're having ideas on their own. And sometimes they're not quite all put together yet. And in a second, Steve, talk about that, because I know the students at your school are ready to fly. They're ready to go off to college and do their thing. I think the one exciting piece that probably is a little different from elementary is they're not just parroting what their teachers have said. They're not just parroting what maybe they've been taught by their parents. They're having those ideas on their own. And that's a great thing to see when you get them in class and you're watching them have their opinions on different things, not just is this a fact, is this, but what their thoughts are about different topics. It's a wonderful thing to see, because you can see the little person in them coming out. And I remember with my daughter, when she was in that age, I've been around kids, working with kids my whole life, and I was still surprised to see her little personality come out about those ages. And Steve, talk about that in the high school level, because your kids are doing all kinds of things, getting ready for the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I again, not having worked in middle or in elementary school, to talk about the differences, I might be not the best person to do that, but I can say that you see, different gradations of structure exist from ninth grade to senior year, and you see relatively different levels of exertion of independence exist, right? I mean, I was talking with a couple of seniors who I have known since they were ninth graders at our school about their transition to seniors, and it was kind of like, hey, can you believe you're seniors? Like, no, we still feel like in some ways like we might still be ninth graders. And we talked about some of the stages that they might go through as seniors to make the next transition. And one of the real things that we talked about was how at some point they are going to start to make a separation between their campus and our campus. And that might have several emotions, from anger to sorrow to exhilaration. And so I think that there's a lot of different experiences kids are having at all of our levels to try and understand who they are becoming as a person, and how they're becoming, and how they balance the things that are comfortable for them, the things that push them, the things that maybe make them feel like they're in kind of a danger zone. And that's still the job of schools, is how to help them navigate some of those emotions.
Yeah, and I think, Lisa, when you started talking about how your kids are 1,500 days old, it made me think, before school started, we were talking to our staff, about the social emotional learning,
Right.
which has always been a big deal. It now has a catchier title, I guess, but we've always talked about, how to treat kids, how what you say to kids makes a difference. And one thing that caught my attention, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, is when we, at 52 years old, I've had 52 years of layers of learning things. I've learned, of course, the educational piece, but dealing with people, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. 52 years. And I don't know how many days that is. A lot.
But we don't do higher math on Saturday.
That's right. Thank you. I couldn't even get the coffee in the coffee pot this morning. I made hot water in my coffee pot. So that's how my day started. But I think that's important to remember, especially at your level. The kids have 1,500 days on the planet, like you said. That's kind of a sobering thought when these kids are coming in or they're being sent to the administrator because they're in trouble. They've done something that needs to go to the office. Right. And I know that plays on your mind. Do you want to talk about that when a kid comes in? And it could be a serious discipline issue that you have to address. But again, they're on the planet for 7 or 8 years.
Right. Well, when they come to me, typically it's, excuse me, because there's a safety issue, or just some profound thing. And what I've learned in those layers, you talk about your 52 years, I have 51 years of layers, and I learn something every day about what I do, about people, and I love it. But one of the most, I think, profound things that I've learned about these little children is, I'm sorry, allergies, is that they are communicating. No matter what it is that they're doing, they're letting us know what's going on. So when you're 15, 16, 17, 100 days old, we have to give them words for that, and we have to validate. It's super important, in my opinion, to validate kiddos and how they feel, because if you have a 5-year-old flailing on the floor and you get down to it and they say, I was mad, well, of course you were mad, and it's okay to be mad. It's how we behave when we're mad that we have to focus on. So um, I think in my position, I'm giving the words to those kiddos, like name your feelings. And that's where I talk about the counselor coming in, because we work, I have been so lucky in every school I've been in to be a partner with the counselor. And we, because if you look at an elementary school, if the principal and the assistant principal are both tied up, I mean, principals, you guys are off campus a lot, and then that leaves the assistant principal responsible for everything that's going on. The counselor steps up and they're an administrator for a while, and partnering together, but we're naming those feelings and teaching kiddos how to evolve through. And in our old school teacher brain, like when you think about when we were in elementary school, kids are supposed to, in our brain, sit, listen, don't interrupt, follow the directions. If you don't do what I say, I'm calling your dad, and oh my God, call the cops, don't call my dad. I mean, that was my thing, but that's not the child that we're raising anymore. Thankfully, we are, I think, especially in our district, I think we focus a lot on problem solving, real life problem solving. So when teachers get with me, really frustrated, he won't blah, blah, and he's arguing. He's not arguing, he's debating with you, or she has a different opinion than you, and that's okay. So it's starting what we were talking about earlier about them kind of launching off on their own. They're starting younger and younger and younger with debate of, I don't agree with you. I don't, and as the teacher or the assistant principal, sometimes we have to check ourselves and go, am I upset by the way they're behaving, or am I upset because their opinion is different than mine? Their viewpoint is different. So
I think it's a good point, and I think talking about the counseling piece is a great idea. And I'd love to get a counselor to come on and share the brain with us and share that role, because that's an entirely different piece. You start talking about being outside the administrative offices. So Lisa, I want to thank you a lot for coming on. We appreciate it. We appreciate the support on Twitter as well.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I've enjoyed the conversation. Mags, do you want to wrap it up for us and
No,
call it a day?
I was just going to say, I think in terms of like pushing into new frontiers, this is by far and away our longest episode of Sharing the Brain. And I think that there's a lot of things that we're uncovering, and we could probably talk for hours on the roles of both assistant principals and principals in terms of how we're shaping our young people's minds at all three of our levels. So Lisa, thanks for joining us and giving us some more elementary school perspective from an assistant principal's context.
Yep,
you
we
bet.
appreciate
I'm
it.
happy to do it any other time if you like.
Excellent. Thank you. Steve, talk about joining us for Sharing the Brain. Who can join us? Because
I mean, we're here on Twitter at Sharing the Brain, or you can catch Stu and I at our Twitter feeds, and we're open to questions, to ideas, to feedback. We've had a few things. Someone, I think, made even a comment about the trophy that's sitting to your right there, Stu, about whether or not it's Mr. Heisman. So maybe we can just say a quick thing about that and offer any other questions that you guys might have, whether it be about collective teacher efficacy, about the perspective of leadership from an assistant principal or principal standpoint, anything that you would drop us a line for, or if you'd want to join us, anything would be great. Stu, take that.
Yeah, no, that's my Heisman. Obviously, it was 1987. I got the Heisman B. Somebody else won the actual Heisman. This is the B is for baby. It's a baby Heisman, and it's a boring story. So we'll see y'all later.
All right, take care. That's on record.